It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by Ray White, the largest real estate and property group in Australasia.
And welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Podcast. And we're talking to Daniel Kelly from Ray White, Yamba and McLean. Welcome to the Real Estate Podcast.
Thanks, Craig. Pleasure to be with you.
Boy, it's a nice part of the world that you're in.
We're extremely fortunate, Craig, to live where we do here on the north coast of New South Wales. It's a very beautiful part of the world. We've been made very obvious to us during the course of COVID, especially. We've managed to keep the majority of our freedoms and enjoy this beautiful coastal town that we have here.
Now, the thing is, not only you have noticed how beautiful it is and the locals have noticed how beautiful it is, but people outside of the area have noticed as well. So there is a bit of a increased demand for coastal properties at the moment in your area. Tell me a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's probably not necessarily so popular in the eyes of locals. They've had to compete a little bit harder for property than what they might have been used to in years gone by. But the secret of what's so great about our area is certainly out for those buyers from the likes of Sydney and Melbourne. We've seen more interest from those two areas in the last 12 months than we've ever seen before. It has created a change of environment, I suppose, for our local market. Posed a couple of challenges for locals along the way in terms of having an understanding of how the market is now performing, the strength of it, and that's been a fairly sudden shift. So for us locals, we tend to have a bit of a habit, I guess, of looking at the market today, referring to what it was 12 months, 2 years ago, and obviously things have changed, whereas buyers from outside of the area tend to come into our area with a fresh set of eyes and look at it and understand that for a coastal area, our marketplace still offers very good value for money relative to other places.
You know, Yamba and McLean, like a lot of other coastal areas, what has happened with COVID, I think, has made people living in the cities, the metro areas, I think they've reevaluated their lives totally, and they've thought, let's get out of the rat race. And suddenly you're looking at these coastal areas and the price point is completely different. And even if they're paying sort of top dollar in your area, it's a lot more value for money than what they would be paying where they are. So that's a bit of an adjustment, isn't it? That's a mental adjustment for locals, particularly wanting to buy in, perhaps first-time home owners. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but there is a sort of realignment, if you will, in terms of the mindset, because you're going to have to catch up with that to be competitive.
Very, very much so. I think you've pretty well hit the nail on the head there. I mean, while our market has seen fairly significant uplift in the last 12 to 18 months, when you look at average sale prices in the city areas versus average sale prices in regional areas such as ours, there's a very real ability for those buyers in the city areas to sell what they have, come and purchase here, and in fact still have money left over. And I guess what COVID has taught us is just the value of home and where we live. So I think, the last 12 months, there's been a really significant shift from buyers perhaps owning real estate for the sake of suiting work life and whatever else might come with it. But all of a sudden, it's been more about lifestyle and where you live, what you actually do outside of work times. And obviously for an area like ours, where surrounded by a river and national parks and beaches and everything else, plays a really big role in the area that you enjoy in your downtime.
The locals that are listening to this podcast right now are saying, Daniel, what are you doing? You're letting the secret out. You're telling everybody we don't want this.
It's been a fine line to walk, Craig, in the last 6 months or so. Yamba's had its fair share of publicity in some fairly big newspapers and so forth, being dubbed the next Byron Bay, and you collectively hear all of the locals cringe whenever there's an article written or a story run on the news. But to an extent, I agree with it. To an extent, I don't. I think Yamba's very much its own marketplace, and it's got a bright future of its own ahead of it. I don't necessarily think we have to compare it to other locations as far as that's concerned. But with that said, so secret's out. Nowadays our marketplace is far better known than what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I started in real estate.
Now, dare I say it, locals of Yamba and McLean, dare I say this, but for anybody listening to the podcast outside of the area, what's going on in terms of the infrastructure?
Infrastructure, there's been a few key things change for us in the last few years. Pacific Highway enjoyed a fairly substantial upgrade right up and down the coast for that matter, but the advantage for us here locally has been travel times to the likes of Brisbane have been substantially reduced. Even driving now to Sydney, buyers and people in general are doing that sort of 7 hours or thereabouts. That was a 8-9 hour trip not long ago. So our accessibility through to the metropolitan areas is far better now. Our nearest regional airport in Ballina is only an hour's drive away, and that gives you very easy access to the likes of Sydney and Melbourne. So we're all of a sudden that the trip to Yamba from other areas and metropolitan areas especially is now much less. That in itself has played a key role. But off the back of those things, we've seen a few other bits and pieces as well in terms of hospitality has always been a big thing for Yamba. It's a holiday town, always has been, probably always will be. COVID has knocked that around a little bit, but it's probably proven to us locals especially that we are still a popular part of this state. When travel was less restricted than it is now, holidaymakers were able to travel from down south, and we were one of the few towns sort of as far north in the state as you could go before having to try and cross the Queensland border, which has been impossible. So we've had our ups and downs during COVID, but it's proven to us that as a little town, we're actually quite self-sufficient.
So I'm quite curious because I used to live on the Gold Coast. I also used to live in Sydney, but Yamba drive time from the Gold Coast and from Brisbane, what sort of time are we looking at now?
From Yamba to the Gold Coast now is just over 2 hours. You can actually do Yamba to Brisbane in just under 3. So it's quite an easy trip.
Wow, it's not bad, is it?
Not
That's
at all.
Pretty good, yeah. All right, well, look, great to chat and catch up and talk about Yamba and Maclean. That's certainly, I think, informed a lot of our audience listening into the podcast. And thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Craig.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.